last week, we were talking about the candles of Shabbat, and now we're moving on to the next ritual. We're trying to go in order somewhat. So now we're talking about Kiddush, the Kiddush that we make Friday evening and Saturday morning. So the first thing, of course, I think is to look at those texts. So we'll take a look at the beginning with Friday. We'll look at the first source is the text of Kiddush for Friday, translated into English, and I'll read that now. Evening became morning, the sixth day, and the heavens and the earth and all that filled them were complete. And on the seventh day, God completed the labor he had performed, and he refrained on the seventh day from all labor which he had performed. And God blessed the seventh day, and he sanctified it, for he then refrained from all his labor, from the act of creation that God had performed. Blessed are you, the Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and hoped for us, and with love and intent invested us with his sacred Sabbath as a memorial to the deed of creation. It is the first among the holy festivals commemorating the exodus from Egypt. For you chose us and sanctified us out of all nations, and with love and intent you invested us with your holy Sabbath. Blessed are you, Hashem, sanctifier of the Sabbath. Okay, so I put in bold. It's kind of in three sections. I put in bold. The first section is the Vayachulu. That's the Vayachulu, and the heavens and the earth were all then filled and complete. Were complete. So that's the opening section, and then we have the blessing on the wine, and then we have what's actually Kiddush, the blessing on sanctifying the Sabbath. So that's kind of the three sections of that. So I want to talk about what are some of the themes having to do with Shabbat that are expressed here. What themes are expressed in Kiddush? So it's about creation, that God is the creator of the world, and Shabbat is a testament to that creation. It's about the Sabbath day being about rest, and that's an act of emulating God. Just as God created for 6 days and then rested for one day, we have the day of rest. And part of that's about a unity with God and an emulating of God. And it's also about the special relationship of God with the Jewish people. So all these like really profound themes are expressed in this text. And this is something that we're supposed to do to sanctify the Sabbath. We say this text over wine, and we'll learn more about why we do it in that way. But it's expressing these important themes. That's what I wanted to look at, actually see those themes first. Okay, and the second one, the text for Kiddush on Saturday is different. It's somewhat of a different text, but also pulling from biblical verses, also bringing to light some similar and some different themes of Shabbat. And the children of Israel shall observe Shabbat by establishing the Shabbat for their generations as an eternal covenant. Between me and the children of Israel, it is an eternal sign that in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he ceased from work and rested. Remember the Shabbat day to sanctify it. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is Shabbat for the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your manservant or your maidservant, and your cattle, and the stranger who is in your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Shabbat day and made it holy. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. So in this one we have more text, more verses from the biblical text, and then the blessing is at the end. So just some slight logistical differences. And the themes expressed here. So we have this idea of the eternal covenant. So this lets us know that Shabbat is something for all Jewish generations and all future Jewish generations. It's not something that ended with the Israelites. It's eternal. It's forever that we have Shabbat, and we relate to God through Shabbat. That the respite from labor that's entailed in Shabbat is for everyone. So it's for everyone of every gender and class, and even animals are included. Everyone is entitled to the rest that this day that naturally comes with it. All people and all animals, all life. And then the Shabbat day is innately holy. I think that's something that comes up as well in these texts, that the day itself has a power. And then this language of, I think is very important, the Oti Le'olam, the eternal sign, that language that came up in the first half of that Kiddush. So this idea of Shabbat is a sign in and of itself. So for example, we don't, men wear tefillin the other 6 days of the week. Shabbat morning, we don't wear tefillin. We don't wear tefillin at all on Shabbat. because we say that the day itself is a sign. We don't need another sign of our relationship with God. We don't need to bind it upon our bodies because the day takes place of that. The day itself is a sign of the covenant that the Jewish people have with God. We don't need any kind of physical reminder or the usual ways in which that's manifest. Okay, so Kiddush serves, it's the moment of verbally declaring all these things. All these themes that we just went through we do that, we express those themes, we declare them in Kiddush, and we do it over wine, and we do it to sanctify the day. So let's figure out a little bit more about that, how we get to that point of having these themes in our biblical text, and then how we translate that to being a specific ritual. Okay, source number 3. I scroll. Source number 3. Okay. Rava said, and some say it was Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi who said, even an individual who prays on Shabbat evening must recite the passage, and the heavens and the earth were finished, vayachulu. And Rab Hamnuna said, anyone who prays on Shabbat evening and recites the passage of vayachulu, the verse ascribed him credit as if he became a partner with the Holy One, blessed be he, in the act of creation. And it is stated, and the heavens and the earth were finished, vayachulu. Do not read it as were finished, vayachulu, rather as they finished, vayachalu. Rabbi Elazar said, from where is it derived that speech is like action? As it is stated, by the word of God the heavens were made, and all of their hosts by the breath of his mouth. So it's more than just, I talked before about those themes that were asserted. It's more than just about asserting themes. We're actually participating in an act of creation. We're participating, we're being partners with God in creation. Then that can be done through words. So I think there's it sounds like maybe an odd idea or a difficult concept, but I think there's a lot of precedent for the power of words and other ways in which we actually manifest into the world something through words and other aspects of our religious practice. So the first example I thought of would be blessings. When we say a blessing before we do an action, we're making it so that that action is no longer just physically doing something, but it's actually now doing a mitzvah, right? So when we say a blessing before shaking the lulav and etrog, we're recognizing that we're about to do an action that has some kind of greater significance, and then it does. And then it is like the performance of a mitzvah as opposed to just some kind of random movement. And there's also this idea of words being integral to creation, or being the way in which creation is done, follows throughout the story of creation in Bereshit. When we read the first book of the Torah and talks about the creation of the world, it always says repetitively, Vayomer Hashem, Vayomer, Vayomer, and God said, let there be this, and there was this, right? That formula repeats itself a few times in the story of creation. So the world was created through words. So this is our way of doing that. By bringing God into the world with our words, it's a way of, we're partners with God in creation. And that's the function of Kiddush. Okay, source number 4. How do we, let's put this into kind of a halachic language, the language of a mitzvah. It is a positive commandment to express the sanctity of the Shabbat day in words. For it is written, remember to sanctify the Sabbath day. That is to say, remember in terms of praise and sanctification. One should remember it as at its beginning and its conclusion by reciting the Kiddush with the Sabbath, when the Sabbath begins, and the Havdalah when it ends. Okay, so we have this verse in the Torah that's a mitzvah. We're told to do a mitzvah, remember to sanctify the Sabbath day. And this is how the rabbis decided we're doing that. How are we performing that mitzvah of remembering the Sabbath day? We do it in a few ways. One of these important ways is Kiddush and Havdalah. We sanctify the Sabbath with words because that's the rabbinically fixed way of doing it, is through Kiddush and Havdalah. Okay, so now we're gonna branch off into a few different sections and look at specific details about Kiddush. Starting with, I want to talk about what we make Kiddush on, and there's just like some really nice, interesting sources from the Talmud. I really love excerpts from the Talmud where you get to really know like the characters, their personalities, the different rabbis, the sages of the Talmud. I think some interesting things come up in their halakhic discussions when you learn a little bit about their character. So let's look at source number 5. I'm sorry, I didn't scroll quickly enough before. Sorry about that. So now source number 5. Our rabbis taught, remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Remember it over wine. Okay, so this is just instruction how we should do Kiddush over wine. So why wine? That's the next obvious question. And now just a verse before we go back to the Talmudic sources, a verse from Psalms. And wine makes human hearts glad, making the face brighter than oil, and bread satiates the human heart. Wine has this strong association with joy in the Jewish tradition. Wine and bread are both unique. They both have a very unique status of being very important. One expression of that is that they each have their own bracha, their own blessing. So while other foods are by categories, we have a blessing for fruits of the ground and for fruits of the tree, and we have a blessing that covers shefachol, that covers everything. So meat and cheese and eggs and everything that's not covered by the other blessings. But wine gets its own blessing, Brei Pri Agafen, and bread also has its own blessing of Hamot Yilachem et Haaretz, right? So that's one indicator of them being special. So we know wine is special, so that makes sense that it would be a good choice of what we're gonna choose to do this sanctification on. But is wine a set rule? Does it have to be wine, or are there other options? So source number 7, we get into that debate in the Talmud. The sages taught, one recites Kiddush only over wine, and one recites blessings only over wine. The rabbis taught, one does not recite Kiddush over beer. From the time of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, they said, one recites Kiddush over beer. Okay, so some opinion saying yes or no, wine is the only appropriate thing that you can use. And this other source, yes, you can make it over other things. We're talking about specifically wine, or just wine, or wine and beer. So what's the variables that are important here? Is it about it being something that's alcohol? Is it about it being something that we consider special? Is it should it be a drink that's like thoroughly enjoyed by people? What is the determining variable if we say just wine, or if we say wine and beer and other alcohols? Which of those is really the determining factor? I think source number 8, here's a great anecdote about one of the rabbis in the Talmud. So Levi sent Rabbi Yehuda Anasi a beer of 13 soakings, meaning this beer that I think it's with dates that they would make by constantly soaking it, doing multiple times, running it through dates, this beer. He tasted it and it was especially pleasant. He said, like this is fit to recite Kiddush over and to say upon it all the songs and praises in the world. At night, it caused him pain. He said, it pains and it soothes. So it's a little bit of a funny story. He seems to be suggesting that wine was preferred over beer because it had a superior taste. So it could be that by saying how much he was surprised at how good this drink was, and that therefore it's fitting for Kiddush, he seems to be suggesting that that's the determining factor, that it being like a wonderful, a great drink, a really enjoyable drink. And it might have been, had it not been for the fact that afterwards he got some tummy troubles from this, maybe it would have been that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would have more firmly advocated non-wine beverages for Kiddush, which we don't find him doing later on. Here's another source, source number 9. Rav was found by Rav Huna reciting Kiddush over beer. He said to him, Abba has started to acquire coins with beer. Okay, so this one needs some explanation. It's a little bit of a insult here, a little jab. Rav, by making Kiddush over beer, seems to be implicitly endorsing it because he's doing it himself, and he's someone that's very trustworthy and very learned. So if he's doing it, he seems to be endorsing it. Rav Huna, you should understand the relationship here, that Rav Huna would be the generation later, so he's much younger and would be more like the student to the teacher of Rav. So it's a kind of a big deal, him challenging the older rabbi here, who would have been in the generation of his teachers. And he's accusing him of having ulterior motives. So it's a very big deal. He's accusing even his being sincere and saying that this is okay. He's saying maybe you're making money off of beer if you're willing to do this. It's so inappropriate, so not the right choice to make. So a little bit of a sticky situation here, but an interesting dynamic. Let's keep going. Source number 10. And Rava said, so this is a different, there's a lot of similar names, but not Rava, so a much later sage from the Talmud. Rava's of later generations than Rav, or not much later, but later. And he says, one who recites Kiddush over beer, his drink should be beer. So Rava, in other places in the Talmud, you can see that he's a very big fan of wine. He thought it was not advised to use something other than wine, even though he seems to be suggesting that it's permissible. It's not his first choice. He's not happy about it, but it's permissible. And I think his opinion being that it has to do with probably the quality of it, that other things are inferior drink to wine. But he does stipulate here, maybe because of his frustration or him really needing evidence that someone really prefers beer to wine if they're going to use it for Kiddush. So he stipulates that if you're going to use beer, it better be because you really love it and it's your drink of choice. So there seems to be this, again, this strong desire to suggest that it should be something that is very dear to someone, something that they really enjoy and take pleasure in. Okay, so we just looked at all those sources. What is the actual practical halacha? What do we say about what drinks are appropriate for Kiddush and for that matter for Havdalah? So the rule is that we say that for Friday night Kiddush, it has to be wine or grape juice. And if you don't have wine or grape juice, you would actually do something that's interesting. Maybe you've seen it done before or not, and make Kiddush on the challah. So you wouldn't substitute any drink for Friday night Kiddush. However, Saturday, not only is it allowed, but it's totally allowed. It's not that only if you don't have wine. You actually could just choose to do on something if you really enjoy beer or you really enjoy a liquor. That would be fine as well for Saturday, and the same goes for Havdalah. And in fact, even for Saturday and Havdalah, you could even use a non-alcoholic drink or a non-grape derived drink. There's an idea of, I don't have any sources for this, but there's a concept of Homer Medina, like a drink of the land. So anything that's popular and looked at as like a nice drink in the cultural context would also be acceptable. So we say Friday night, we make strict just wine or grape juice. And if you don't have one, you got to do Kiddush. You got to say this prayer on the challah. Saturday and Havdalah, we allow for much more flexibility. So we kind of reach a compromise position based on this debate that we just saw. Okay. Another switching to a new topic having to do with Kiddush is the question of who can make Kiddush and who can make Kiddush for whom, rather. So we have the first important halakhic concept that's to know is that with all mitzvot, the way it goes is if someone's going to exempt another person, meaning if someone is going to, like in this example, make Kiddush, say the words, hold the wine, just one person, and then other people be exempt, which is what we're very familiar with at any Shabbat meal. Usually one person will make the Kiddush for everyone. In order to do that, and that goes for all mitzvot, any mitzvot that you're doing for another person, it has to be that you have the same status of the same obligation. You have to have an equal obligation in order to be the one discharging someone's obligation. So biblical to biblical, rabbinic to rabbinic. So if there's a discrepancy, only the person with a higher obligation can make it for the person with a lower obligation. So the question comes up about men and women and making Kiddush for each other. So let me read this source. Source number 11. Okay. Women are obligated in Kiddush, even though it is a positive commandment dependent on time. Because remember, positive commandments for Shabbat is connected to guard, the negative commandments of Shabbat. And these women, since they are included in guard, they're also included in remember. And they can discharge men from their obligation since they are obligated biblically like them. Okay, so like I said, for biblical mitzvot, so we talked about the going back. So for biblical mitzvot that are uniquely for Shabbat, what this source is saying is that women are also commanded. So even though we learn from the Mishnah this idea of women are exempt from positive mitzvot that are time bound, like for example, tefillin and recitation of Shema, because these are only during fixed times and they're positive commandments, normally women would be exempt, but on Shabbat, there's something different. We say that just as they're obligated in shamor, the guarding, meaning they can't do the negative. They have to adhere to the negative commandments of Shabbat. So women and men are equally obligated not to light fire on Shabbat, for example, right? So because of the obligation of shamor, of guarding Shabbat, of refraining from the negative commandments, so too they're obligated in zachor, the positive commandments, the remembrance of Shabbat, something like Kiddush. So when people have the same level of obligation, in this case, they can discharge each other's obligation. So maybe, for reasons of maybe certain families, the way people would like it to be, or just traditional reasons of what is normally done, you'll probably see in many homes that the man will make Kiddush, but there's actually no reason that needs to be. So women and men are equally obligated in Kiddush and therefore are allowed to make it for one another. Okay, and the last question that I want to look at, and we have a few sources on this, is the question of whether we sit or stand for Kiddush. And the answer to this question, I think, is really interesting because it brings in a bunch of different variables. So there's the halachic reason, and then there's reasons of kind of the imagery that we're creating, reasons of Kabbalistic and mystical reasons, and all these come together to inform different traditions of how to do Kiddush. Okay, source number 12. One should make Kiddush on a full cup of wine that is not blemished. Blemished, by the way, that meaning that it's a fresh cup of wine. You haven't drank from that cup yet. That's what that means in this context. And to require all that is required for the cup for bir cup hamazon, meaning it needs to be a full cup and it needs to be in a nice cup, clean and nice cup. And to say vayechulu, so that was the first paragraph of Friday Night Kiddush that we looked at. To say vayechulu while standing, and afterwards one says b'rei pri agafen, and afterwards one says. Okay, so meaning Kiddush, meaning the actual bracha at the end of the Friday Night Kiddush. Remember we said, we looked at the Friday Night Kiddush, I broke it into three sections. Vayechulu, the first paragraph, which is the psukim about the creation, and then the blessing on wine, which is just that one line, and then the blessing of Kiddush is the lines that follow that actually sanctify the day of the Shabbat day. Okay, Ramah, so this is the Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch, which was written by a Sephardi rabbi. This is the Ashkenazi commentary on that to let Ashkenazi Jews who are going to use it as a resource know if there's any differences between what their practice should be and what the Shulchan Aruch advises. So the Ramah says, one may stand during the time of Kiddush, but it is better to sit. Our custom is to sit even while saying Vayechulu, except when we begin, we stand a bit to honor Hashem, because we begin Yom Hashishi Vayechulu Hashemayim, and it hints to Hashem in the first letters of this phrase. Those first, he's actually saying that there's what's the word? When the letters form, when you have acronym, is that the right word? Yeah, I think so. Yom Hashishi, Yud Hey, Vayechulu Hashemayim, Vav Hey. That spells God's name. So he's saying just maybe you would just stand for that part because of being a reference to Hashem. So the question comes up: why is sitting better than standing? What does the Ramah mean by this? And why is standing okay for Vayechulu if we say sitting is better when it comes to the rest of it? Okay, so we have first source number 13. This source from the Talmud. Shmuel said, there is no valid Kiddush except in the place of one's Shabbat meal. So this really important concept that comes up, and it comes up in a number of different things, of Makom Seuda, the place of the meal. The idea of it being, so we actually say, like, if you're gonna eat and then you want to move somewhere really far, you actually should bench and then go start a new meal, because you're switching shinui makom, you're changing your place. So we have an idea of like the fixed place of the meal being important. So in our context, sitting or standing, you're at the place of the meal. So what does it mean to be at the place of the meal when you're all in the same room anyway? So let's look at, we're asking how strictly do we define that place of the meal? And what's a good indicator of that? Okay, source number 14. Mishnah Brura, so this is a later halachic source. but it is better to sit. That in this manner, it is more accurately Kiddush at the place of the meal, since he is sitting at the table of his meal at the moment of Kiddush. And since one person is exempting all the others in their obligation, it is necessary to have them fixed together, and sitting together is considered fixed together. According to that opinion, those who are listening also need to be sitting, and it's best to be careful for this. In any case, one needs to be cautious that the listeners are together at the time of Kiddush in order to fulfill their obligation, and they should not be spread out and walk one here and one there, because that is not called fixed at all. So what he's saying is that sitting at a table together is the most ideal representation of being at the place of a meal. It's also the most clear indicator of a group of individuals being a collective, which is something that becomes halakhically necessary, the idea of being a collective and being together actually at the meal, which is necessary when we're talking about exempting others, fulfilling others' obligations by saying the text and having them listen. So certainly we can't have people walking all around the house when you're making Kiddush. That wouldn't count. They would have to hear Kiddush again. They would have to make it themselves. They need to be present in the room. They can't just be walking about. So definitely present in the room. But the question becomes is what's the most ideal and what's acceptable? So the most ideal is it's very clear that when we're all sitting at a table together, that we're a group, that we're having a meal together, that everyone's able to hear and concentrate, as opposed to maybe standing as this tiny bit more distance. It's a tiny bit less clear that we're collective, that we're at a table together, at a meal together, that we're really at the place of the meal. So those are the sources that's the source for sitting for Kiddush, that this idea of makom seuda, of being a collective, being a group, being at the place of the meal. What's more the place of the meal than the table itself? So there's a very halakhic reason solely, and very kind of like a very literal approach to what it means to be at the place of the meal together. Great. So I have just two more sources, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay. Great. So those are the sources for sitting. I think I have to share my screen again. Those are the sources for sitting. So what is a source for standing? Okay. Again, the Mishnah Brura, source number 15. And say vayachulu while standing, since this is edut, testimony, on the creation of the heavens and the earth, and edut requires standing. And even though we say it in the davening, he should repeat it and say it in order to exempt his sons and daughters and household. Okay, so remember the first, I broke it down to three sections, the vayachulu, and then the Brei Pri Hagafen, and then the actual prayer of Kiddush. So that first paragraph, vayachulu, we actually already said. We said during Mariv, we say that in the Mariv Amidah of Shabbat, and we say it right after the Amidah. The first thing that the Chazan starts, that everyone joins in on, is that paragraph of vayachulu. So even still, we say it a third time. And we say it so that you're saying it at the place of the meal, and that you're saying it for other people that maybe didn't daven or weren't at shul or didn't hear it otherwise, but you're also saying it to be at the place of the meal. So thinking back to our first few sources. Kiddush is an acknowledgement and affirmation of God's having created the world, and a moment for us to become partners with God through words. So this affirmation is a testimony that the rabbis, they compare to a witness giving testimony. It said in that source, in source number 15, since it's edut, it's testimony, it's functioning as like a witness. The rabbis use this metaphor for saying the text of Vayachulu that discusses the creation of the world. So we're testifying to God as creator. And just as in a Jewish court, a witness would stand and give their testimony, so too for Vayachulu. So that's the reason why we would be standing, at least for the Vayachulu part, or for the whole thing, is because of the idea of it being this, invoking that imagery of giving testimony. We're testifying to God as creator of the world, and we should kind of represent that with the kind of imagery that we use for giving testimony in a halakhic court. Okay, and then source number 16, now we'll offer a mystical reason. as to why we should stand for any part of Kiddush. Come and let us go out to greet the bride, the queen. And some say that this is what he would say. Come and let us go out to greet Shabbat, the bride, the queen. Rabbi Yanai would wrap himself in his talit and stand at the eve of Shabbat at twilight saying, come bride, come bride. So this excerpt, it's a nice one, comes, it mentions, it comes in a broader context of mentioning a few of the customs of different Talmudic rabbis and their practice of how they would personally welcome Shabbat. So Rabbi Yanai, the one that we're looking at here, like many others, he would greet the Shabbat the Shabbat bride while standing, and this seems to be the way the other rabbis support. That's how the Shabbat bride should be greeted. That's what we do when we say Lecha Dodi. We stand for the last paragraph. We say Boi Kala, come bride. We're talking about this mystical Shabbat bride. So that's the other reason for standing, would be that we stand in order to greet the Shabbat bride. Okay, so there's actually three positions, three ways of doing Kiddush: standing the whole time, sitting the whole time, and standing and then sitting. So I'll talk about each one really briefly. So standing the whole time would be because of these two concepts: the Vayachulu being an act of testimony, that we're testifying to God as creator of the world, and we should represent that by standing to give our testimony. And also you have the mystical reason. So many Hasidic sects will stand because of the mystical reason of standing for the beginning part. And then there's later sources that say if you're standing for Vayachulu, you could stand for all of Kiddush, and that becomes a very common practice. Sitting the whole time would be because of the pure halachic reason, right? That it's about being at Makom Seuda, the place of the meal. That is most important. And what is more the place of the meal, and what is more being a collective group than being at a table together for the meal? And then there's kind of the position, and this is, by the way, I'm only talking about Friday night Kiddush for the context we're at. I'll say a word about Saturday after. The position that kind of meets all of the needs would be standing and then sitting. So standing because of Vayachulu and giving testimony, and because of this Kabbalistic reason, and then sitting for the actual Kiddush part, so that you're fulfilling this Makom Seuda, this halachic concern. Certainly, if someone does stand the whole time, they would sit right at the end and drink the wine while sitting, and that's because of this Makom Seuda part. And also, I think it's important to say that, like I said, this only has to do with Friday night, because then when we think about Saturday morning Kiddush, those two reasons that we said why to stand just go away. We're no longer greeting the Shabbat bride because we're already well into Shabbat. She's already been welcomed. And we no longer have the same verses that specifically focus on creation, and therefore needing to do this imagery of testifying. So Saturday we all sit. And the same would go for Yom Tov, that we would also sit for Kiddush on Yom Tov, because the two reasons to justify standing aren't there. So that's just a few. We looked at a number of different things. I wanted to give this like really broad kind of overview and look at a bunch of like different details of Kiddush. So now we will open it up for questions. There's a lot that happens. So a question about anything. We talked about a lot of different things. So please